Yo, what's up? Ladies and gentlemen.
Motorsport 411 presents
all the four and two-wheeled action.
Motorsport 411 with Sean Cardovillis.
Welcome to Motorsport 411, your home for all your four and two-wheel action in Africa. Coming up in this episode, we have a roundup of the CAC Regional Motocross that was held in Uganda over the weekend. It was a heavy defeat for Kenya against Uganda. And we catch up with the motocross legend Steve Anthony as he reminisces about his brilliant motorsports career.
All the four and two-wheeled action. Motorsport 411.
Welcome to the show. So it was a heavy defeat for Kenya against Uganda at the CAC Regional Motocross Challenge, the first leg that was held at the Uganda Motorsports Arena in Busiika. Let's have a roundup of the event with Ugandan photographer who was at the event, Innocent Mutaawe. Innocent, thank you so much for joining us on Motorsport 411. Now, that was quite a thrashing, Uganda over Kenya. How did it go for you from the journalist's point of view?
In terms of the competition, Uganda and Kenya, I think nowadays Uganda have tried to upgrade their game. Unlike before, Kenya had a very tight competition against Uganda. According to the general performance, Uganda, they got 1,625 points, and Kenya, 497 points. That's the difference from Uganda and Kenyans. Then in the 50cc class, Uganda, they had 276 points. Kenya, 116. 65cc, that's the class where we had a tight competition. The likes of the Miguel, Katende, and the Kenyans, that was a good competition. Most of them, they know each other. They know how to handle the pressure of the rivals. 65cc, Uganda 323 points, Kenya 70. And then the 85cc, Uganda had 265 points, Kenya 124. In the 125cc, Uganda 340, Kenya didn't get a point there. MX2, this is where Kenyans outcompete Ugandans in that class, the MX2, because Uganda they got 98 points, Kenya 138 points. MX1, Uganda 107 points, and Kenya 49 points. The veterans class, Uganda had 156. Kenya didn't get a point there. And the masters, Uganda 60 and Kenya didn't get a point there. Yeah, that's the overall picture from the results.
Very interesting. Now, looking at your photos from the event, it looked like there were very, very good crowds at the event.
Yeah, it's very hard in Uganda to have a motorsport event and then you don't talk about the crowds. It's the same way. We as photographers, we have a different perspective of such events organized in Uganda. When it comes to the crowds, the turn-up was very huge compared to the previous CS we had last year, which was held in Garuga, Victoria Park. This time in Busiika, the advantage of the venue being so big to accommodate the large numbers of fans, competitors, or service providers, and being that it was an Easter holiday, the only advantage that we had, it was better to spice up the event, having some rally drivers. There are some fans who are interested to enjoy the rally cars. At the same time, they need to watch the riders. It's like a culture, like as we normally say that motorsport is a religion in Uganda.
Very, very interesting. Thanks very much, Innocent Mutaawe from Uganda. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Motorsport 411.
You're welcome, Sean.
We'll be back.
All the four- and two-wheeled action.
Motorsport 411.
Welcome back. So as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, it was a heavy defeat for Kenya against Uganda, and it took place at the Uganda Motorsports Arena in Busiika. Let's get the latest from the Kenya camp with the captain, Githuku Mungai. Githuku, thank you so much for speaking to us on Motorsport 411. Congratulations. That was really, really difficult in Uganda. In the end, it just looked like Uganda had too many entries compared to you guys.
Yes, it's true. They had a lot more riders, but I think it was still a good experience for our riders. Tough to begin with because their track is a bit different to ours, but all in all, our riders got to learn the track very quickly, and we ended up doing quite well in the end. We had a few riders on the podium, and we managed to lock out in the 5 classes that we entered. We managed to get 6 riders on the podium. So overall, a good start. But yeah, as you mentioned, one of the challenges we had is that Uganda have a bigger team, being the home track advantage. They had most of their riders ready to ride. So that's where they kind of got us.
Now, it seems like deja vu from last year because it was the same thing. Uganda had many more riders. They end up with a big lead heading into the return leg at Jamhuri Park later in the year. So it leaves you guys with a real uphill task for the return leg.
Yes, it's a big uphill task, but we tried to rally as much riders as we can for the one in December so that we can challenge them and so we can prove ourselves on our home ground.
When you say the track is quite different to Jamhuri Park, just tell us about that.
So the track surface there is a bit different. They rip it a bit deeper, which means that it gets more ruts than we do here in Jamhuri. So it poses a big challenge to people who don't ride in ruts a lot, which a lot of our riders haven't experienced that. But over the weekend, we managed to have our riders get a hang of the track and actually improve their scores. So an example of this would be Wahome Mutaawe, who came in with only 15 minutes of practice. He came from 3rd, 2nd, and he finished the weekend on a high, getting 2nd overall. So that's the challenge we face of having to get to learn the track.
Who from the Kenya team impressed you most?
So we had a few standout riders. In the 50cc class, we had Barry Notea, who came 2nd overall. The 85 class, we had 3 riders there, Lewis, Wahome, and Atete, and all 3 of them managed to score 2nd, 3rd, and 5th. So we had a very good showing there. Also, our MX2 class was a standout. They were our highest scoring class with Alex Kandie, Masalule Kitui, and Rohan Gandhi. They came 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. So we scored 138 points in that class, actually beating the Ugandans. So our MX2 class actually beat the Ugandans at their home race. So that's a very impressive takeaway from our side.
It's quite an undertaking in terms of the logistics to go to Uganda. Where was the track, first of all?
Yeah, so the track was located in Busiika. It's maybe around 1.5 hours away from Kampala. It's a big challenge getting the bikes there, but I think the more times we go there, the easier it'll become as we iron out the logistics, and maybe we can get some sponsorship, which can reduce the financial burden on our riders, so we can take a bigger team next time.
Yeah, just tell us about that. How difficult is it to get sponsorship these days?
It's quite difficult, yeah. But I think we try our best, and this year it seems that we have a good team that's working very hard to get us what we need, and hopefully soon enough we can see motocross grow to a point where we can take a bigger team to Uganda, then they can bring a bigger team here so that we can lock out the championship just based on numbers also.
All right. And then I see at the coast at Vipingo, Alistair Kavanagh is having a training session for motocross. Just give us more details on that.
So I'm not in the best position to comment on that training, but I've also seen it being circulated. It seems like it'll be a camp, which would be very good for riders. I think the Vipingo track also has a lot of the similar traits to the one we rode in Uganda, so it'll be a good training ground for our riders. Also, in terms of the Motocross of Africa Nations, which is going to be in August in South Africa, that's also going to be on a sand track, so training in Bipingo, where it's a bit sandy, will also benefit our riders for that upcoming challenge.
Githuku, if you had a word or a saying for the Ugandans, what would you tell them?
Just tell them that we'll be back.
A bit like Schwarzenegger.
Yes, like Arnold Schwarzenegger used to say.
Okay, so how would you say it?
We'll be back.
All right. Thanks very much, Githuku Mungai, who's the captain of the Kenya team that participated in the CAC Championship, the first leg in Uganda over the weekend. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Motorsport 411.
Okay, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
We'll be back.
All the 4 and 2-wheeled action.
Motorsport 411.
Welcome back. Now, they say the golden age of motocross took place in the 70s and 80s, where many of the current and past rally drivers honed their skills. Let's go down memory lane with Steve Anthony, who was one of the leading riders of that era. Steve, thank you so much for speaking to us on Motorsport 411. You're an absolute legend in motocross. Of course, your motocross career goes back to the 70s. Just tell us, first of all, how you got into motorsport.
So I started riding when I was 10 years old. My parents bought me a small Honda 50, the mini trail. And at 10 years old, I was riding around our garden. We had like a 7-acre plot in Ruaraka. And I was always riding around, trying to go faster and faster. And then eventually, when I was 13 years old, my dad went to the casino one night, and he had a lucky evening in the casino, and he managed to win. I think it was about 17 or 19,000 shillings at that time. And he bought me a brand new CZ 250, which was a bike made in Czechoslovakia, which was what most people were sort of using for private scrambling and motocross in those days. So with this new CZ, we started racing. My first race was in Mathatani circuit in 1974. I was 13 years old.
Incredible. Now, both you and your brother Jet were really known for motocross, and then, of course, for four wheels a little bit later. Just tell us a bit about your father, Henry.
So most people knew Dad as the bike racer. He was a really talented bike racer in Speedway. He did a lot of Speedway on Jap motorcycles. And then later on, he raced in Nakuru, on Nakuru tarmac race circuit, on a Norton Manx, which was a 500cc single cylinder. And those were sort of state-of-the-art racing bikes of that time. Dad was very successful as a bike racer. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he held the Nakuru lap record for 14 years. Which was then broken by younger guys on more modern Japanese machinery, or if not, probably a Norton of 750 cc's with a gentleman that I forgot his name, finally broke Dad's lap record in Nakuru.
Just tell us about those days. That really was seen as the golden age of motorsport, the 60s and the 70s, particularly with that Lunga Lunga track in Nakuru. And then, of course, there was the Embakasi track in Nairobi. Okay, well, I was very much a youngster at that time. I remember going and watching the races at Nakuru as a young boy. And, of course, I was fascinated with racing. I never actually saw my dad race, because what happened was he was in a rally and he had an accident which almost cost him his life. I was I think I wasn't even born in 1960 thereabouts. And so I never saw him race. And I used to hear stories about him racing in Nakuru. And then, of course, from a very young age, at about 4 years old, I became very fascinated with bike racing and wanted to get into racing. So, yeah, and then as the sport evolved and Nakuru sort of faded out, then, of course, Embakasi came into the fold. But again, I never raced at Embakasi on the track, but did watch a lot of the older guys
Brabhams, for example, Vic Preston Jr. and Bill Parkinson in his Ford Capri. And then we had Junior was also racing his 350 Yamaha in Embakasi. And yeah, it was a great time. And as you say, there was also a really top motorsportsman, Jack Simonian. Shekhar Mehta used to drive in Embakasi, and people like this.
Yeah, very sad to see those tracks are no more now. So you got the CZ250. Just tell us about your progression in motocross.
We bought the bike. We started practicing immediately. My father was very influential. He obviously loved bike racing and had to stop prematurely his career. So practice a bit, and then suddenly there was a scramble. It was called scrambling in those days, not motocross. It was a scramble in Matatani, and I was 13 years old. And on my debut, I think I won the novice and intermediate races, and like 2 other races on my first outing on that CZ. And we carried on with the CZ for a couple of years. It was successful and did really well. But of course, they were beginning to be outdated by the Japanese bikes. And in 1976, Hugh Leone and Rob Cooper, who were in charge of Honda's competition department, they invited me as a fully sponsored rider to ride one of their Hondas. And then, so I started in 76 with a Honda, and then from there on, initially the first Honda that I rode was, it wasn't a bad bike, but it wasn't state of the art, and had very poor suspension, very, very difficult handling characteristics, and it also lacked power. So we had quite a few successful events. But then I was also handicapped for a couple of years until 1978, when Honda bought me a more modern and actually equally competitive machine, which I could then race properly against Suzuki and Yamaha riders.
You went on to unprecedented success. Just tell us about your competition in those days.
Yeah, we had some fantastic riders there. There was still the champion of that time, Bill DeGaris, who was a great rider. There was Vic Preston Jr. We had Robert Cahartley. We had Johnny Bealey. We had Grant Stevenson. We had Tochi Kalsi. A huge array of riders in the mid 70s towards the late 70s.
All right, so you had that competition. Just tell us how you managed to beat them.
Okay, so it was a fairly quick, but also it was a gradual process, in the sense that obviously I had to work very hard. In 76, 77 with the Honda, I was definitely handicapped with performance characteristics, but still, I was getting the odd result, which was definitely showing that I had the potential. So yeah, it was a lot of hard work, a lot of good preparation, a lot of we spent a lot of time practicing. I would come home from school, and luckily we lived on a 7 to 10 acre shamba, and I had my own small track. So instead of studying when I came back from school, I would straight away, much to the detriment and the annoyance of our neighbors at that time, I would be on my bike practicing. I would always put in some practice. Maybe half an hour to an hour, nearly almost every day. That's what I lived for. And it came, and then eventually, I think when I got the new Honda in 78, on its first outing, I was able to, for want of a better word, begin to stamp some authority on my performances, and managed on its maiden outing to beat Bill DeGaris, which few people had done until that time. I spent a lot of time listening to old mentors like Jack Simonian. Of course, my father was a mentor, and guys like Vic Preston Jr. They were all very knowledgeable about the sport and very talented. And of course, you as a youngster, you're always picking tips from them on how to go faster, And that's what I did, and then polished off on improving my own riding.
Steve, of course, a lot of these guys, particularly junior, they were massive in the world of rallying, but you were carving your niche, so to speak, in motocross. How popular was motocross in those days?
It was extremely popular because it wasn't an expensive sport, and a lot of the good rally drivers, or the top rally drivers, like you say, like Junior and people like myself, people like Ian Duncan, Rob Collins, they were all bike riders. They started off their careers as bike riders, especially in Kenya, because we had the opportunity to go out into the bush and on the tracks. We had so much open space that we were able to ride. And you start honing your skills. And one of the things that riding teaches you, it teaches you how to understand fully the terrain in front of you, even without pace notes, because in rallying we use pace notes. But when you're riding on your own, and you can read the lines just naturally. So immediately you see a corner and you just know your best angle of approach, your best angle of departure. When you're hitting jumps or bumps, you know the type of impact you're going to expect and the type of launch you're going to get. So that actually transfers almost completely naturally from 2 wheels to 4 wheels, and then you then have this sixth sense or natural instinct, whatever the case.
Now, I'm going to get personal. I used to do motocross between 1980 and 85, I think it was, or 86. I have very fond memories of the quarry. You remember that behind the carnivore. I'm sure you rode on that track.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the quarry was one of the tough parts of the carnivore track. And then, of course, it was initiated. I think when we left Mathatani, we no longer went to Mathatani. We started riding at Golf Range. It was called Golf Range, and then Carnivore opened there. Yes, the quarry was the hard, and it was the physical part of the track, and then the track would open out into the fields below, which were much faster, and the plains. But when you got into the quarry, the physical element of motocross really came in, and then of course your endurance and your stamina and your strength, pacing yourself through a race. I mean, it was fine. You get a good start, but then you still have to have the endurance factor and the stamina to stop guys who are either snapping at your heels or you're chasing them and hunting them down, whichever way, So yes, the quarry was difficult.
Okay, we mentioned him earlier, your brother Jet. Both of you really carved out your names in motorsport. Just a quick word about him.
Jet was a really, really top bike rider. And of course, I was running on the 250s for Honda, and then Honda included the sponsorship for Jet on 125s. So Jet had a lot of success in the 125 category. And yes, he did win. I'm sure he won a 125 championships during those days. I mean, we sort of did tend to dominate, and always were trying our best to succeed. Of course, we had a tough father who was also wanting us to succeed and continuously pushing us to try and get the best out of ourselves and the bikes of the day.
All right. A few more questions for you. First of all, how many tracks were there in those days?
Motocross tracks. We basically had one track in Mathatani when I first started. Then we used to do all sorts of things. We used to do enduro on the same bike. So all that used to happen after that at Golf Range. There were enduros, there were trials, there was motocross at Golf Range. Then we had another track in Karen, which was actually an autocross track. It was a very fast track, relatively smooth. Cars used to race on it during the day, and also bikes. So we had a mixed day. That was a fairly fun track. And then we used our motocross bikes to actually ride in City Stadium and Speedway, what we call Speedway, which was actually the 400-meter running track as an oval. And that was where the day's racing took place. Then we had a couple of other upcountry tracks, and down at the coast we had Ngutatu at the coast, which was a really, really nice fast motocross track. I raced once at Soy Club near Kitale, between Eldoret and Kitale. They hosted a motocross there, which was again a very, very interesting track to ride on, and did fairly well there. Did really well in both Ngutatu and Soy motocrosses.
We were talking about the popularity. How popular was it with the fans?
It was really popular. You know, I still till today I hear people saying, "Wow, those days were fantastic." And when you have an array of riders of the likes of Digaris, myself, Junior, it was really exciting to watch. And of course, everyone had their favorites, and everybody had the guys that they were cheering on and trying to. Yeah, so it was very popular, and it was a great group of people with great camaraderie. Sport was prime importance, and improving our skills and doing well.
The technology has changed so much these days. You look at motocross these days. Now, I'm going to ask you this question in two parts. First of all, when you look at motocross today, the spark seems to have gone in terms of fans going to watch it and things like that. Just your thoughts on the state of the sport today?
I think they need to have a variety of tracks. I do like watching Jamhuri. It's sort of evolved into more or less a supercross type of track with huge jumps and everything. A lot of our riding in our day was very high speed. Of course, we had a few jumps, and there were some of them were fairly big jumps. And if you hit a jump at fifth gear with a motocross bike, you're probably doing around 120 kilometers per hour, if not more, and you do fly for long distances. And the landing was not so nice, in those days, because our bikes, when I first started with the CZ in Matatani, you had like 2 inches of suspension travel on the rear. It was double shocked. The front had 4 inches. So of course you had a little bit of suspension, but everything was being taken by your body as the rider. And when you're young, you don't feel this. I used to practice, and I say every time I'd go around on a lap, I try and hit a bump harder and harder and harder, and saying, I can take it. Today, trust me, my body feels all the punishment it took in those days. But then we evolved onto the Honda, which had slightly better suspension. The first Honda I got, it had about 4 inches on the rear and maybe 6 inches on the front. And finally, I got it onto a better bike, which then was still twin shocked, but then you were looking at about 12 inches front and rear. And then eventually they moved on to monoshock on the rear, which was a better form of suspension. It seemed to work, and it does work with a lot of linkages. It works, you get a much more progressive and a comfortable ride these days on most motocross bikes.
You're actually answering my second question. And in fact, when I was riding in those days, it came with that huge transition from about 1981, I think, when Kawasaki, in fact, the Japanese manufacturers came out with the monoshock suspension. That really changed the whole motocross scene because now people could jump and, just ride even higher than before, huh?
No, absolutely. I mean, Kawasaki were actually one of the big pioneers with their unitrack suspension. And I think it was probably day and night ahead of anybody else. And then Suzuki came in with what they called the fully floater suspension.
The full floater, I remember that, yeah.
Which was also a monoshock system, which also worked very well. Honda had what they call the ProLink system, which was a system of levers connected to the single monoshock. But Honda took a while to actually develop and evolve their suspension and to become comparable to the rest. I think because a lot of the other manufacturers had started their development. Yamaha was on monoshock way before anybody else. But then monoshock didn't really work. So then in the end, Yamaha had to adopt a system similar to the Kawasaki's Unitrack or the fully floater on the Suzuki.
Regional championships. Did you get to race against the Ugandans back in your career?
Yes, we did race against the Ugandans, but it was mostly, they used to come here for Speedway because it was kind of a reciprocative situation where we would go to Uganda, although I never went to Uganda because by that time I had started maturing and racing. We stopped that reciprocation for some reason or other. But the Ugandans would come here and they would come and race in Speedway. And we raced against guys like Paddy Blick and Arthur Blick. Those were the top guys. To the best of my knowledge and to the best of what I remember, most of the time the Kenyan riders came out on top at that time. So yeah, we had some good duels in the city stadium.
Africa, across the continent, how did you fare? Did you get to race against, for example, the South Africans? How did that go?
Okay, during my time, I never raced against any South Africans in Kenya, but I did race against the British junior motocross champion, a guy called Jeremy Watley at the golf range. And he was exceptionally quick. He eventually went on to almost becoming world 250 motocross champion for Suzuki. And I managed to beat him at golf range. Of course, I was on home terrain, and I managed to beat him in 2 or 3 of the races on the day. And I think he won a couple during that day. So we had some real big duels, and it was fantastic to have that level of competition come out to Kenya and race against them.
Yeah, just thinking about South Africa, of course, in those days there was apartheid, so it would have been very difficult to meet them, huh?
Very true. Of course, you're very right, Sean. We were not allowed to travel to South Africa, and I think vice versa. Yeah, it was a complete no-no.
All right, just finally, I know both you and Jet still quite involved with motorsports, mainly as officials for both enduro and then also on 4 wheels. Just tell us about that.
I was asked to help in the WRC. I drove the first WRC we got back. I drove Michel Mouton as FIA safety delegate. So we were route opening and checking for all aspects of safety for the WRC Safari Rally. So I've helped on that. And then latterly, in last year, I was asked by chairman of the East African Safari Classic Rally, Joey Goes, to drive zero car in the Classic Safari, which is again route opening, but that's now on open roads, which I had a lot of fun because those were long sections of about 80 to 100 kilometers, if not more, up near Eldoret in December. And it rekindled some of the Safari Rally, the original Safari Rally roads that I did in the 1990s in the Daihatsu Charade. So yeah, I had a tremendous amount of fun, and of course we were doing a job trying to ensure safety for the first car on the road, that he doesn't meet oncoming traffic, he doesn't meet boda-bodas, doesn't meet livestock, and all the people in because now Kenya is quite densely populated compared to the earlier rallying days of the 80s and 90s. So safety has become a situation of paramount importance, and we've been trying to ensure that the competitors remain safe as they compete, particularly on open roads. I mean, it's fine in WRC where it's closed roads and shorter sections. The safety aspect is still important, but of course you don't have oncoming traffic and that sort of thing. And my brother Jet, I believe he has been doing a good job as clerk of the course for Rally Raid, and they've been handling that for the last season or so.
All right, Steve, fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Motorsport 411. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
It's been fantastic, Sean. And it's really, really kind of you. And I feel very, very humbled and happy to have been part of your story and your success in promoting motorsport.
That's an absolute legend. Steve Anthony will be back.
Motorsport Motorsports 411 with Sean Cardovillis.
So that's it for the show this week. Our thanks very much to Innocent Mutaawe, Githuku Mungai and Steve Anthony. Our thanks as always to Big City Studio. I'm Sean Cardovillis. See you next week.